All right, well, today we are back to work on our 300 horsepower, 4-seat, supercharged mini jet boat rebuild project. So instead of building a whole new boat, I decided to buy this one from my buddy that was pretty badly wrecked. It got into a tussle with a very large tree, and the tree came out on top. Not to mention a lot of other tussles in its life. It's seen some hard times. So we immediately stripped the boat apart after enjoying it a little bit, of course. A baseline so that we know how the upgrades improved everything. So little enjoyment, stripped it apart, took everything out of it, started working on the body damage, the structural damage, welding up cracks and tears and bending things back. But now it is about time to get into the proper rebuilding side of things, the upgrading, the outfitting, the accessorizing, the really fun stuff that's going to change this boat from my friend's boat into our boat. And it should be a pretty drastic transformation. The upgrade should make a really big difference. So I'm really excited to see what it looks like when we're on the other side of this. But first things first, we got to get through it. We got to put the legwork in. So that being said, we're going to start with finishing up our lingering welding projects. We need to weld in a pair of speaker boxes up here. We're going to be adding another pair of speakers for the front seats. That way we should have a pretty bumping sound system for cruising around on the river. And then we get to dive into the fun, satisfying, rewarding stuff. But first things first, order of operations. We can't hook anything up until we get the welding done. We can't add on accessories till we can hook them up. So we got to do this part first, but that's okay. Should be a little tricky. It's going to be a little tricky, but should be able to knock it out quick and then move on to the table of new and exciting parts. So that being said, we're not going to get any work done unless I quit jibber jabbering and I get to work. So I'm going to do that. Before we could start welding on our speaker boxes, while I had everything set up, we had a bit of a side quest to attend to. Raldo and Josue are building a couple of cars at their shop, a Z32 and a 240, and they needed some aluminum TIG welding done. They needed these blow-off valve flanges welded onto this intercooler pipe as well as another intercooler pipe welded together. So I wanted to get that knocked out for them real quick so they could keep making progress on their end before we started on welding up our speaker box projects. And it's one of those things, man. Welding is like 20% of the work of fabricating. So since they already had this stuff cut and fit and mostly cleaned up, it was a pretty quick and painless and easy process for me to just glue it together with the TIG welder. So once we got that done, it was time to move on to our project, the speaker boxes. So I want to make a bottom plate for them just to complete them. We're going to drill holes in this to let any water out, but I just, I want it to be a kind of a whole box. So I started cutting them out on the bandsaw, but this piece is just a little too big. So we had to cut a little bit of it off with the circular saw, which I'm not a fan of doing because it is chaotic, but we got it. We were able to finish cutting it, our fine line cutting in the bandsaw, and then work on getting them tacked together into the speaker box. So I tacked them basically from the top side just to make sure they were nice and flush with the bottom of the speaker box, and then I decided to weld them out from the bottom because it is much easier to access everything. There's so many things that you look at when it comes to welding and you think, oh, that looks like I could easily get in there with the TIG torch and the rod and on both my hands, and then you go to do it and you realize that it is very tricky to get into. I have done that to myself a number of times. I still continue to do it to myself, thinking something's going to be easy to weld, and then it's not. But we got them welded up, and then I had to enlist Josue's help to hold the box in place while I tacked it. I tried to use some tape. I tried a number of different things, and it wasn't working. So having a second set of hands to hold the box while I tried my best to tack them was really the best way to go about it. But it was tricky, man, because this hole is thick, so it takes a while to get heat into it, and the metal's not super clean because of all the paint. Even though we did grind it off, it is not the optimal welding situation. It's out of position and dirty aluminum. So this is really what separates the men from the boys. I had to go left-handed, which I never do. And, the people who are really good at welding, this is really where they shine, where they can weld this weird, awkward, out-of-position stuff. It's one thing to weld something when you can get to it nicely on the bench, but it is a lot harder when you're trying to sit all weird and pedal with your knee. It's tough. Did it. Mission accomplished. God, that was gonna work out. Sheesh. All right, well, it didn't go well, but they are welded in on the top. I didn't clean the sides enough to, it's just, I need a push-pull gun to be able to weld this. For me to be able to weld it. Someone who's a professional could probably contort themselves in here with a TIG, but maybe from the outside, I don't know. I can't comfortably get to that to weld it, and I'm tired of the burning paint smell. So I'm gonna panel bond them the rest of the way in. Panel bond literally puts whole cars together, so it'll hold some speaker boxes in. They're not structural, they're literally just holding some speakers, so that's my cop out at least. I'm gonna panel bond them. I did initially think about just panel bonding these in so that I didn't have to grind down the paint and repaint over it. And I decided, you know what? I know how to weld. I might as well weld them. And we ended up at the panel bond at the end of the day anyway. But panel bond is insane stuff. It has a nozzle that basically mixes the two parts together as you squeeze it out. And this stuff is strong. So I've got plenty of faith that this is going to be fine. So once we had the panel bond curing, I wanted to just take a look at the speakers and test fit them and make sure that everything was right before it was too late for us to go back. So fortunately, looks like they're going to fit. All right, well, we let our panel bond cure overnight before we started messing with this, and these things are one with the boat. But yeah, they're solid, rock solid. So now it's time to throw some paint on them before we drill and tap them for our speakers. Unfortunately, we don't have this paint color. This is, you know, real paint, but I think some rattle can spray paint will get the gist. Oh, come on, Taylor. You ever used masking tape before, bro? So after letting the paint cure for probably definitely not enough time, which is pretty standard, I used the template to go ahead and mark out our holes, and we're just going to drill and tap these. I drilled my drain holes so we don't have any water getting trapped in there, and then we could drill and tap our mounting holes. That is the nice thing about working with aluminum, and reasonably thick aluminum in particular, is that you have enough room to tap them. If this was a thin piece of steel, we would have to drill holes and put rib nuts or use nuts and bolts, which would be virtually impossible to install. So definitely drilling and tapping them is the way to go. It's going to save us a lot of time and make this really serviceable, which hopefully we won't have to be taking these in and out very often or ever, but at least if we do, it won't be too bad. So from there, before we can bolt the speakers in, we need to get the wires hooked up, which means we need to make our little wiring harnesses from our speakers up to our amp. So went ahead and cut some speaker wire that I've had sitting around forever. I think I bought this stuff when I thought it would be okay to use speaker wire in a non-speaker wire application, and then learned before I used it that that was a bad idea, and then it's sat ever since. So at least it's going to use finally. So went ahead and pulled all the tape off, and then we can go ahead and start routing our wires in and getting them all hooked up. I want to go ahead and get this other wiring that we had pulled back out of the way to weld the boxes in, push back through now while we have the opening before we block it off with the speakers. And then it's time to bolt the speakers in. Now, fortunately, I had the exact right hardware for this. I used some M4 bolts, M4 tap, and it worked out perfect. I love having a good selection of hardware in times like this. Makes life easy. All right, speakers are installed. I gotta clean up the old ones. They're looking all crusty. But check it out. We got 4 speakers now. Pretty pumped on that. That looks good. You know, they're in basically exactly the same spot as the back two. You know, you're sitting right here. You got a speaker right there and right there. And the back passengers have them back here. Yeah, that's nice. All right, well, I want to go ahead and get them wired up and just test wire up the amp. So we still need to make that loom and run it up. But in the meantime, I'm just gonna run this to the battery, and then we will see what it sounds like. Pretty exciting stuff. We gotta get up under the dash though. All right, well, I had to to get in here to get these pieces out, but as you can see, there's quite a bit of junk under here. We might as well vacuum it out while we're here. The amp has these little like spring clips that I don't understand why they're not attached, but they're not attached. So if you pull the wire out not knowing that, you yank them out with it. I was trying to be lazy when it came to cleaning out the bilge area and just vacuum up all this stuff, but unfortunately the vacuum just kept getting clogged up because of all these pine needles and stuff, so we had to get in there by hand, pick up all the large stuff, and then come back with the vacuum. But boy, is it satisfying to clean out something that's got a bunch of junk packed in it. So now that we've got that done, unexpected side quest, and we've got our clips that fell under the floorboard, we can now put it back in and get to wiring up the amp. I am so curious to see what this is going to sound like, if it's any louder. I mean, we are taking 2 channels that we're powering 1 speaker each to powering 2 speakers each. So we're going to lose some power to each speaker, but we're going to have better distribution of sound, is my hope here. Obviously, it would be a bummer if we did all this and it wasn't any louder, but hopefully it is. The tricky part is we've got to get the 2 front speaker wires going into 1 channel and the 2 rears going into another channel, but they're coming from different directions, so it's a little bit of a logistics pain, but we can make it work. All right, now we just need power to this power wire and everything should come on. All right, I got my wire that I cut, taped back together. All right, kill switch on. No fires, that's good. All right, JL Audio's on. All right, well, audio system is done and dusted. I do wish I would have tried to find a better match, or even an attempt at a match to this paint versus painting those black, but I'm sure once they weather in, it won't be super noticeable. If it is, then it'll bother me enough and I'll try to find a spray can match to this, which I should have done, but maybe we'll rewrap the inside. We're gonna C-deck it, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot to come. Temporary, it looks okay. At a glance, not that noticeable, but really happy with our speaker combo now. I mean, it's overall louder, and you know, having these 2 speakers right there, I think I'll actually be able to hear this while I'm cruising. That's my whole goal. I just want to be able to hear it when I'm, you know, cruising around. Obviously, if we're ripping wide open throttle, back rivers, all that, you're not going to be able to hear it. But if I could hear it while just cruising around down the river, that'd be cool. So anyway, happy with that. That's done. It's time to move on to the wiring. Now, we're going to go a little fancy with this, just because, I don't know, I happen to be one of the few people who actually likes wiring, I guess. I enjoy it. It's satisfying. It's rewarding. So, you know, we have the stuff to do it real nice. So we might as well. There's not a lot to it. So it's not like we got to use a ton of material. I don't know. We're going to make it nice. But before we can start routing wires, we need to get an idea of how many wires we need, what gauge they need to be, you know, what our amp draw is going to be, what circuits we're going to use, all of that. Which means we need to install our other accessories. So we have everything that's going on right now, I think, over here on the bench. We're going to be using the leftover mil-spec wire from when I wired the chassis harness on the Vet. Really nice, super small packaging. Terminal lugs, we got Deutsch connectors, solid contacts, crimp connectors, ring terminals, everything we need to wire this boat up all nice and fancy schmancy. I wasn't exactly sure how many amps these light bars were going to draw, and I needed to know that to know how much circuit we needed and how much wire we needed, if we could get away with one 12-gauge wire routed up to split to both or what. So my clever idea to determine amp draw was to basically hook the light up to my Vet and use my PDM, which is a solid-state power distribution module, to see what the amp draw was. It tells me in real time how many amps something is drawing, and as it turns out, these light bars, according to it, only draw 3 amps. Everything else is accurate. That number felt a little low, so I'm going to multiply it by 3 to be on the safe side, but even still, that's under 20 amps for both. We are plenty good with one 12-gauge wire. So now it's time to determine how we want to mount these. Now, the problem is if we mount them in the middle of the frame, then we can't open the window all the way. But if we mount them on the sides, it looks kind of goofy, and in the middle, we get to share this one bolt. So we decided to commit to the middle. That way, one less hole we've got to drill through the frame and through the window, and all we got to do is drill a hole for the wire and a hole for the outside bolt. So I got them bolted into the windshield frame bolts and then started drilling my holes for the outside bolt and the wiring. Unfortunately, these wires are really nice in the fact that they're rubber booted and molded, but that means we can't take them apart. So I had to cut the ends off in order to run them through a small hole in the frame, so we didn't have to cut a giant hole to fit the whole connector through. Plus, they're a little too short and we have to extend them anyway. But it pains me because I like doing end-to-end wiring where you basically crimp a pin on one end, you crimp a pin on the other. There's no butt connectors, there's no splices, there's no nonsense. But hey, we got to do what we got to do, and if we got to do it, we're just going to try to do it as nice as we can. So I crimped on some mil-spec wire to extend it down under the dash, and we're going to just test tape it. I would love to heat shrink loom it, but unfortunately I do not have the right size heat shrink loom, and you know, at the end of the day, this isn't mission critical. You know, they're just some light bars. We have 2 pairs. But it bothers me because if you crimp one and extend it, now you've got 2 crimp sections plus the pins plus, you know, it is what it is. We got to deal with it. So I blasted a couple holes up through the dash to poke them down through so that we can have the connectors down under the dash, out of sight, out of mind. And then all we've got to do is crimp our connectors back on, and we have our plugs ready to go. They're terminated, everything's set up. All we've got to do is wire to those plugs, which we have a bunch of, so that makes our lives easy. And with that, our light bars are mostly installed. All right, light bars are done. I'm pretty happy with these. Like, I think they look sweet on there. I think it'll be nice to have the combination of amber and white light. I probably would have gone all amber. I just like the way the amber light looks, but you know, I don't know. It's nice to have both, but I think they look pretty good. They're kind of small enough to where they're not too intrusive, but large enough to where they'll do something. And we got it nice and clean by having the brackets flip this way and the wiring going through here. So we got the wiring routed too. We just got to figure out a good way to secure the part going down here between the windows. It goes down here through our little hole, and then see if I can reach. Got our connector down here, and then there's the connector for the rigids. So we got our connectors there. That's exactly what we need so that we can wire from the back, our fuse box area, up to the front. But we still have one more thing to mount. We want to have everything that's going to get wired to in place before we start wiring, and that is our nav lights. I am super excited about these because I was trying to find the slimmest, smallest option because these boats are small and most nav light kind of stuff's meant for a larger boat. So these are super sleek, super small. I mean, you can see this is like the normal flush mount nav light, which is what I have on this boat, and it's massive in comparison. And these are Coast Guard legal. So we got these for the front, red, green, and then we've got our rears, which are just white light, basically kind of like daytime running lights. So we'll want to mount all of these because these are all going to get wired off the same circuit. So we press one button and we've got all of our running lights on. So yeah, basically we need to determine exactly where we want to mount them, draw our holes, bulkhead them, you know the deal. Let's get to it. When it comes to mounting these, probably the cleanest looking way to do it would be to mount them right up as close to the nose as possible. But the important thing with nav lights is they need to be able to be seen at 115 degrees out, which is more than 90, more than directly to the side. So that's not going to work if they're all the way at the front. They're going to shine light forward pretty much only. So trying to get them in the legal limits where they need to be. So with the mounting holes drilled and cleaned up and ready to go, I wanted to go ahead and wire these on the bench because it's just way easier than having to do it up under the dash in the boat or in a car. However, I had a bit of a dilemma. I have not restocked my Deutsch connectors in a while, and I don't really have what I wanted to use. All right, so we're using these Deutsch connectors, which are my favorite. I mean, they're what came on the lights. Deutsch connector is really popular. It's a very simple, universal connector. But that being said, I haven't refilled my Deutsch connector kit in a while, and I have no 2-pins. So we're gonna have to use a 4-pin, which will work, but not ideal. My plan was to put these connectors on before I put the lights in, but both lights are gonna wire to the same connector, so I can't do that. But I can at least crimp the pins on ahead of time, get that part done. All right. Let's see. One of the reasons I love using Deutsch connectors for any automotive wiring I do, or I guess boat wiring in this case, is because they are super easy to pin and depin. So even though I'd love to have the connectors on before I put these lights in, pinning them under there is a piece of cake because of these connectors. So I went ahead and put some sealant on them. I'm just using this Hylomar Blue. It's a non-setting gasket maker, so if we ever need to take these off, they won't be glued into place. But it should seal it up from water and stuff, which isn't even a huge deal. But once we got those in and in place, it's time to mount our rear one so that we can wire these all up at the same time. So I went ahead and marked and drilled our holes. I had to, there was a bit of a dilemma on where to mount them, but I decided to just go as far out as possible. It's always a struggle in these scenarios. You got to make those decisions without really being able to see what the end product's going to look like. But I think all the way on the end makes the most sense, just for the safety aspect of having lights at the back of the boat and someone approaching at night being able to see the gist of how large the boat is. So once we got our holes ready, our pins crimped on, all we got to do is install them. This one's a lot easier because I can get to both sides of it and hold it in place while I tighten up the lock rings to secure them down nice and tight. And with that, all of our nav lights are in. All right, we got our navigation lights in, our rear lights. These will also give us some light back here for, you know, I don't know. We might add LEDs like pod lights back here. We'll see. We'll see. We'll have to use it at night and see what we need and what we don't need. We'll still need to add a highlight, like an anchor light. But we got those in, and we got our front nav lights in. Pretty happy with these. Nice and sleek and slim and minimalistic. About as tiny as it could possibly get. Now, I went black because ideally we're going to wrap the boat black and then they'll blend right in. But obviously right now they don't blend in, but it'll make sense later. So those are in. I got them wired, basically tied together and all pinned into the 4-pin connector. It's right there. All we've got to do is hook up to that and we're done. I got to do the same thing for back here. Basically tie these together, pin them into a 4-pin so they're ready to go. And then we can start with all of our individual wiring. However, first, before we do that, I want to do some better cable management in here, and we're going to be swapping the battery, so we might as well just do all this at once. New battery, new cable management, and then we can work on the small auxiliary wiring harness. So we've got a fresh battery from none other than XS Power. I run XS Power in pretty much everything now. I love their batteries. This is a D5100R AGM. This should give us a ton of reserve capacity to play music and leave lights on and do all that stuff. I don't want to have to worry about draining the battery if we're sitting stopped at the beach. So, but it's still smaller than what's in there. That's what's awesome about the XS batteries. They have so much power in such a small package. So we need to get this mounted in there and then start working on cleaning up all those cables and then do the fun part, making a nice fancy wiring harness for all our accessories. I've already got it mapped out here, which all makes sense, but we got to get this battery situation taken care of first. So that being said, we got a lot of work to do if we want to take this thing out tonight, and the weather's not looking great for any day after today, so we really need to try to get it done. So I should probably quit jibber jabbering and we should probably get to work. Get to it. This battery cable redoing situation was definitely a bit of an unplanned side quest. You know, with projects like this, you get sucked into the while you're there's, you know, while we're here redoing the rest of this, we might as well redo this stuff too. You know, while we're putting a new battery in and we've got to maybe change some of these terminal ends, we might as well just do all new cables and all new routing and all of that. So that being said, I generally don't regret the while you're there's unless they drastically delay the end of a project, which if they're going to, then I would say try to skip them if you can. But in this scenario, it's going to take a little more time than I anticipated, but it will be worth it, I believe. You know, making battery cables and stuff is so nice and satisfying, and when it comes to wiring, the shorter you can make something, the better. So having these cables that are longer than they need to be is just power loss, and there's a lot of things that come with it, and just for myself, it looks way nicer when they're nice and short and tucked in there. Plus, if we ever have to diagnose it later, it does make our lives a lot easier. So those are all my justification reasons. You can't stop me. I'm already doing it. We're committed. We're redoing every single one of these battery cables. So fortunately, we got the sizing right, or let me say Remy at XS Power got the sizing right, and this battery fits in there absolutely perfect. So all it is now is just a matter of hooking all of our different cables up, making all of our cables, crimping our ends, heat shrinking them, making everything nice and simple and serviceable. One lesson I have learned from all the battery cables I've made, and this is a hot topic and highly debatable, is that I will never solder a battery cable again, because if a battery cable comes loose, especially a power cable, it'll get really hot. And if it gets hot, it can melt the solder out and then disconnect, and then you got a live wire flopping around. Ask me how I know. It's the exact thing happened to me. Now, obviously, you should just try to keep your wires from coming loose, but I like the idea that if they do and they do get hot, they're not going to get hot enough to melt the solder out, because there is no solder. It's a crimp. It's a solid connection. So with that, our cables and battery are done. All right, brand new, fresh excess power batteries in. All new cables. Really happy with that. It did clean this area up a lot. Makes it a lot easier to deal with and diagnose anything going on in here, and gives us some more room for routing our other wires. It was kind of an unexpected detour, but I'm glad we did it. Definitely worth it. Now that that's done, we can move on to the original. We can get back on the path, get off the detour, and wire up our relay box. So we're going to have some of the stuff going back here. So we'll have kind of a sub harness going to the back, and then we're going to have our harness going up to the front. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to run everything in one nice tight loom up to one big plug up here. So this front section will be in two pieces. There will be the part we're going to build now, which goes up to the big plug, and then the other side of that plug will then branch off to all the different accessories. So that way we'll have effectively our underdash harness and then our main harness running up from the relay box. It'll just make it easier to work on if we ever have to take it out, if we ever need to change anything, add anything, etc. And it gives me an excuse and justification to do it the nice way that I want to do it versus the easy way. So we've got our mock-up wire done. This is how I like to do it. Route a wire, cut it to length for what we need, and then we're just going to cut all the other wires to this length, and we can effectively build this whole part of the loom on the bench. Saves us time having to try to do it in the boat. So we got everything we need to do this, so nothing left to it but to do it. So I'm gonna quit jibber jabbering. We're gonna get back to work. When it comes to building wiring harnesses or doing really any sort of wiring, I used to be the type of person that would hook up one end of the wire, then route it through to length, and then cut it, and then hook up the other end of the wire. But that is not, it's not the ideal way to do it. You take a piece of some junk wire, some sacrificial wire, you route and cut that, and then you can do the rest of it on the bench. That is what makes wiring a lot more enjoyable, is if you're just doing it all on a nice workbench. Now, it does take some planning and some thinking and some plotting. You know, I have all my circuits written down. I have all the gauge wires written down. So I have my cut list of each wire I need to cut and what the length is, so I can get them all cut and then basically start crimping on pins and start assembling them and getting them all put together. Now, the tricky thing here is I changed my mind a couple times. I was going to use an 8-pin connector and run 3 extra wires, then I was going to use a 6, and then I realized that the 12-gauge wire isn't going to fit in a DT connector. It's going to have to go in a DTP connector, whereas the 14 and 16 gauge wire needs to go in a DT connector. So we're going to have 2 separate connectors. I really wanted one big simple connector up there, nice and simple and easy, but unfortunately it's not going to work that way, but we're going to have it all as one harness. So with the connectors pinned and crimped, it's time to try to shove all this wiring through this heat shrink loom. Now, I absolutely love using heat shrink loom because it is so nice and clean and tight and durable. However, the downside is you've got to try to shove this wire all the way through it, and it is not an easy task. Now, the easiest way I've found is to use a little bit of air and open it up while you shove the wire through, but it's a little tricky. So fortunately, these really cooperated better than any I've ever had before. So it went pretty easy, and now that we've got those in there, we've got a match to length and everything everywhere they need to be. It's time to lock them in place and heat shrink this loom. It is the most satisfying thing ever to watch this shrink down to a nice, tight, clean bundle. All right, our main feed harness for our accessories is done. I am really happy with this. The combination of mil-spec wire, which is a lot thinner, like this is 4 12-gauge wires in here, a 16 and a 14, and this loom is like the size of 3 normal non-mil-spec 12-gauge wires. Let me actually show you. This is what was in here before for just 4 14-gauge wires. They might even be 16. 4 18-gauge wires. If you just compare just the 4 wires by themselves to this loom, it's about the same size. And with this corrugated stuff and That's why I love using mil-spec wire and heat shrink loom. You know, you get such a nice, tight, clean, and compact package. So anyway, jibber jabber. These are our front connectors. Obviously, I had to split them up because 12 gauge wires don't fit in a DT style connector. This is a DTP, this is DT, and the next size down is DTM. But anyway, got our plugs, those are gonna be at the front, and then our bare wires here at the back, where we're gonna wire them into the fuse box. So we just need to route it. One of the reasons that I decided to go down the rabbit hole when it came to the wiring on this boat is that it being a boat, and this kind of boat, it's so simple. Everything is square and straightforward. So measuring for wire length and routing things, it's all so simple and straightforward that felt like the time I save on doing all of that stuff, I can make up for by making the harness nicer. And I haven't had an excuse to build a nice heat shrink loom harness in a while. And, you know, I thought this was a good one. I mean, it's a boat. Having things as watertight as possible is ideal. And, you know, it's just rewarding and enjoyable. So basically, we've just got to hook up the bare ends all into this aux beam fuse box. This thing's actually pretty cool. It's all solid state, as far as I can tell. It's 8 buttons. The only thing I dislike is that you can't use an external input to turn something on. That's pretty standard for something like this. So with that, our main harness routing up to the front is done, our bulkhead connection, if you want to call it that. And it's time to build our underdash sub harness. Now this is where things get tricky. The harness running up to the front, super straightforward, just one straight length of wire. However, the underdash harness has a lot of branches, and we've got to split our 12 gauge wire to 2 14s. You know, we've got to send a plug to each side, so we've got to put 2 wires and 1 pin to then split that off so we can minimize using crimps, and then we've got to have grounds going back and forth, and then figure out how we want to heat shrink loom all of that together and where we want those to go. And this one took a lot of planning to try to do it on the bench. It's doable. It's just, it was a little tricky. I really had a couple head scratchers to make sure that I did this right. Not to mention, the only 14 gauge wire I have left of this leftover mil-spec wire is all red. So for every wire that needs to be 14 gauge, which is a lot of them, they all have to be red. So our grounds are red, our powers are red, and both types of lights are red. So it's going to make it a little tricky in the future, but it should all route out to where it's pretty logical as to what goes where. So we managed to get it done. Hopefully it's all done right, because we're pretty committed now. It's time to heat shrink this up, the most satisfying part of the whole thing, and see what the end harness looks like, all done and dusted. All right, our underdash harness is done. So we got our large 4-pin, which we have one open slot because that's an extra that's up there. But if we ever were to wire it later, we'd just put a pin on it and slide it in there. Boom, done. We got our grounds here from the far pair of lights, and our grounds here from the close pair of lights. They should all reach back to the same spot, so we only have to go to one ground spot. And then our little harness, which only has 1 wire coming out of it right now, because the other one is for interior lights, which we will add, but we do not have now. And then its little ground. But, oh, and then this power goes over to the little bus bar for all the accessories. But, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. It's very clean and minimalistic. Just get this ugly guy out of there. Get out of there. Get out of there. All right, it's time to test it out, though. Plug it all in and see if anything turns on or not. Josue's here, by the way. You think it's going to turn on?
I sure hope so.
So I wasn't going to let Josue's lack of optimism ruin my optimism. I got faith. No, I'm just kidding. This thing's most definitely going to turn on. It's just a question of plugging in the right places. Since these wires are all the same color and we have 2 different types of lights, there's a 50-50 shot that we're going to mix up which of these plugs is supposed to go where, but easy enough to correct. Moment of truth.
Which button is it?
I don't know which buttons they are either. All right, kill switch is on. Let's see, top right. Don't know what that is. Oh, yeah, see, I did mess it up. So I just switched this side. There you go. So I sit, oh God, I keep static shocking myself. Oh, nice, these buttons are right next to each other too for the lights. That's accessories. And then we should have nav lights.
Yeah.
That one?
Yep.
Okay.
Really sleep.
Right?
Yeah.
I haven't seen what they look like. It all works!
It's us.
It's a Christmas miracle. Besides messing up the 150/50. Oh yeah, those are bright. Because they're Coast Guard rated to 2 nautical miles. And then the back ones are 2 just like that, but white.
Are those supposed to be on?
No, they're not hooked up yet. All right, well, all of our wiring up here works. That is sick.
Barely see those.
Yeah, they're sleek, right? So yeah, now we need to do basically the same thing for the back here. It's pretty straightforward. Basically, we've got back here bilge pump, our backlights, which I have my 4-pin just like we did in the front. And that's it for right now. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna run wires all to a nice little plug here, and then everything will wire off that. So in the future, when it's time to add those other things, we just pin them into the one side of the connector. So I think I got my process down. I can knock it out pretty quick. But front harness is done. Let's knock this out real quick. So our rear harness is basically just a scaled down version of the front one. It's a much shorter run to the bulkhead connector. The bulkhead's almost not necessary in this case, but I thought, you know, we might as well. It makes it easier to add stuff on later, and we know for sure we're going to be adding stuff on in the rear. So other than that, though, there's less branches, there's less links because it's right by the fuse box. It's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. So I like to be a little old school and write out like my pinouts and my wire colors and all of that stuff. You know, people will tell me, you should use a Excel spreadsheet or something. And I get it. That's definitely the way to do it in the modern way. But it's just easy for me to just write it all down on a piece of paper, scan it into my phone, and then I have it forever, both a physical copy and a digital copy. So we got the harness done, and then it's time to just do the same process of wiring them in to the fuse box. It's interesting wiring stuff into this thing. It's kind of like doing house wiring. But one thing I did decide to do a little differently for the rear harness is to route the grounds back to the fuse box. In the front, we're just grounding to the chassis because the battery's grounded to the chassis. But in the rear, it was easier to just run all these grounds back than to have to individually mount each ground somewhere else around the hole. Okay, moving to shirts. Still switch on. I think we figured out that these were the nav lights.
Yep, nav lights were on.
Now let's go. All right. Oh, I was like, shoot, the front ones aren't on, but they are. Nav lights on. Ella, is this the camera? Are you camera shy?
You and I both.
And then rear lights. Sick. All right. Well, just need to see if I can fit the lid with all these wires, but we used all the features and used every single channel, which granted we have an extra back here right now and an extra up front, and they're all wired in, but it all works, which is exciting. I'm happy about that. So now we need to label the buttons, determine what each thing is, and label the buttons, which I have a kit for that. Oh, and I need to zip tie these wires up here. Oh, and try to put the lid on. So after doing all of the above, my sticky pad zip tie mounts finally came in so that I could zip tie all these wires up. The tricky thing with this boat is we can't really do a P-clamp because you're going to be drilling into the outside of the hole. You're going to have screws poking out. You can't do magnet zip tie mounts because it's aluminum. So really, these sticky pads are the only option. But fortunately, they seem to work pretty well for this. All right, well, we got all the wiring secured. I'm really happy we were able to get these tucked nice and in there. Those are gonna bother me. Those little zip tie deals worked out perfect for that. Keep them nice and tucked away now. You don't see any of the wiring, anything. So got the button pad all labeled. That's our accessory power, cube, slide bar, bilge pump. There wasn't a bilge pump one. I should have got the boat specific button label kit, but whatever. Interior lights, which are not hooked up or installed yet, but all the wiring's there. That's an extra nav lights. So yeah, anyway, these little zip tie deals worked out great under here. Nice and clean and organized. Everything's tucked up, held together, everything's accessible. Everything's laid out logically. Pretty happy with that. The front wiring and our rear wiring here. I guess my only regret is I wish I would have made this a little bit longer so I could have like tucked it down nicer. The connector just kind of wants to go like that. But yeah, that's in there. I installed my little block off plugs for the extras that we got there for when we wire other stuff in. But it's all there, it's all done. New battery, new cables, our lid still fits on our aux beam. I'm real pleased, man. This is why I like wiring. It's so satisfying when you get it done and everything works like it should and get everything tucked up nicely, nice and clean, you know, there's no visible wiring. So yeah, that being said, it's time to put the boat back together and then hopefully go test it out. Oh, we do have, could knock this out real quick too while we're here. I have these little bags that I got for holding my stuff. So like this is gonna be a pouch by my driver's seat. Got the hook and loop with the tape. I got this bag for my little backpack, and then this for our tool bag. And then I've got all my tools. I hand me down the tools from my F80 like on the go tool bag. I got new tools, put those in there, and then hand me down to here. Yeah, so we got, might as well do that, I guess. But first things first, seats, pouches, then we'll see where we're at. Because we need to have everything back in the boat ready to go before we take it out, you know, all our safety stuff. We need a place to put that safety stuff, so let's get to it. Also, take a look, this is all the wiring that we pulled out. Junk! No, it wasn't junk, but just like it being nicer than that. Finally gonna pull this thing, moving blanket out. Man, this thing's been taken apart so long, I forgot what it looked like with seats in it. But yeah, we've got our seats back in, so now it's time to plan where our little bags and pouches are gonna go. This whole Velcro bag plan started with just a pouch by my driver's seat to put my phone in when I'm cruising around, and then I kind of went down the rabbit hole on doing these other kinds of bags, but then I didn't realize that they needed these attachments to be Velcroed, and here we are with all these bags and all these attachments, and hopefully it works half as good as it does in my head. Yeah, like most of the time I could just leave my phone in here with the zipper open, but if we're gonna get rowdy, I can just zip it on up. Mint. All right, cool, one down. With the most important pouch, the pouch that started it all done, it's time to see if this plan works at a larger scale. I'm a little worried this is going to be a little too much weight in this tool bag to hang on Velcro, but I think it's worth a shot. If it works out, it'll be awesome because we'll be able to just stick it onto the side of the boat where there's no real place to put anything there anyway, but it's not in the way. And then when we need it, we just pull it off and we're done. The backpack seemed to work out well, but the tool bag is seeming like it is going to be a little bit too heavy, not to mention having to use this attachment. I think if the tool bag had its own Velcro back just sewn in, this might work better, but I'm trying to keep these buttons from popping, and every time I pull it off, the buttons snap, and it's not working great, but maybe it'll work enough. All right. Oh, it just touches my pouch. I don't know how well this is gonna hold up to bumps in the water, but we'll see, That one works out great in that spot, and that pouch is awesome. I just ordered another one for this side. So driver and passenger will have a place to put their phone, keys, wallet, that kind of stuff, which I put my keys and wallet in there, but you get the idea. So that being said, the boat, as far as I know, is complete. I should probably make sure it turns on. Make sure I didn't forget to hook anything back up in the wiring department. Nope, think we're good. Oh God, why are you beeping? I guess let me try to start it real quick. Okay, not starting. Why I'm doing this, because I might have forgot to hook something up. Oh, that's probably what it is. That's loose. Time to put this thing back on the trailer. It's been a while that it's been off the trailer. back in business. All right, well, it's time to take this thing out to the water and see how all of our improvements are in real life, out in the real world. All right, so unplugged, same as when it's plugged in. It definitely seemed like it was running rough in the shop, but I thought maybe just because it hasn't been ridden in a couple weeks, but that was not the case. We had a check engine light for just about every sensor, and after doing some diag, I decided to unhook the voltage regulator because it was wired direct to the battery, and that seemed to fix it. So I thought, might as well, we're already in the water, might as well go test it out, just see how it is. Quick test. Here's it in the water with the nav lights. Let's check out the rears. It's kind of drizzling on us. Oh yeah, dude, those are great. You definitely see me coming up. And then it's a lot of light. Looks good too, like having the amber up top and the white down at the bottom. Yeah, look at that. See the rain falling, sunset, and running a little bit behind schedule here, but beautiful sunset. I've always wanted to hang out here till sunset, but I've never had lights like this, so I was always kind of too scared to not be able to see on my way home. But we should probably start heading back. Saw a lot of gator eyes on the way here. well, two things. The wiring, we had a bunch of codes. I think it was the voltage regulator. I unhooked the power side of the voltage regulator, and they all went away. Something was shorting out there. I don't know if maybe I got my wires crossed and hooked the power up to the ground, because it's the same color wire, and before I heat shrunk them, I tried to verify which one was which, and I thought I did. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. Need to investigate that. The other thing, it's kind of funny. So I drilled these holes in the wings to let the water that was trapped in here out, and I knew I was going to forget to close them up, and I did. And when I pulled the boat out of the water was pouring out of these. So anyway, I'll have to take this thing back out again soon for test number 2. But for now, we are most definitely out of time. We went way over my allotted time to work on this project and do this video. Between doing it before Kentucky and after Kentucky, it's been a long one, so we're gonna end it here regardless. But we got the test done. It was sick, the lights, and runs good again. I'm happy. So that being said, that's it for this one. So thank you guys for watching. Thanks for subscribing, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.